Welcome to the Procurement Level 4 Apprenticeship. In this video, I'm going to go through the structure of this qualification and I'll take you through the learner journey so you've got an idea of what's involved for this qualification. So to start with, what is an apprenticeship? An apprenticeship offers those over 16 with paid employment and the opportunity to train for jobs at different levels. Traditionally, it was those leaving education, getting their first real job, real bit of work experience, and it allowed them to settle into a new job. Apprenticeships have been reformed, and it is typical to see learners who are perhaps more experienced, but they are moving career, they're changing jobs, or gaining more responsibilities. What's in common with all of that is that the learners typically change in roles, so it's something they're not quite competent at yet. And the apprenticeship journey takes the learner from that stage to becoming fully competent at performing that role. It is a performance-based qualification or a competence-based qualification. So what this means is that the apprenticeship standards were developed with stakeholders from industry and training. They got together and created a list of things or competencies which someone working within procurement at this level would be expected to be able to do. And this qualification is then assessed where a learner puts together a portfolio of evidence which proves that they can complete those tasks in the workplace to a competent level. And the way that we get there is by completing training with that learner to help them get that experience to then be able to complete those assessments. So this is different, and it's where the value comes from. If you think about college or university, where learners would go to a class, a lecture, read some books, learn some knowledge, sit an exam or write an essay. It's all really based around knowledge and understanding there, whereas this apprenticeship is based around competency or performance, and that's where its value lies in. So procurement is essentially the process of acquiring or buying goods and services. However, the role can be much broader than that, to a huge range of related commercial activities. That can be around policy, financial analysis, and engaging with contract law, developing strategy to deliver services, and anything associated with that. Procurement, especially for this qualification, encompasses the entire procurement cycle, and typical roles would include commercial support, commercial analyst, supporting executive, procurement operations support, buyer, assistant buyer, or commercial relationship support. So this qualification is suitable if that is of some relevance to your role. So if you work in procurement, if you work on that procurement cycle, if you're involved in buying or acquiring goods or services for your company, or working out and calculating the strategy, or you're involved in that process, then this qualification will be relevant and help you to improve your skills in the workplace. So what will you get out of this? The first thing you'll receive is a level 4 apprenticeship in procurement. Also, as part of this qualification, you'll receive the SIPS Level 4 Diploma in Procurement and Supply. In addition to that, you'll receive your Level 2 Functional Skills in Maths and English. And finally, you'll receive a portfolio of evidence demonstrating your competency in your role. In terms of progression, once you've completed this apprenticeship, you could progress into a career within your industry. You could also seek to specialise in a particular role within procurement. Procurement is quite a broad area, so you could use this qualification to gain some experience and then seek to specialise into one of those job roles there. That's not an exhaustive list either. You could look to progress on to some other form of education, so you could look to complete an apprenticeship at a higher level, so that could be a level 5 apprenticeship, or it could be a degree apprenticeship. You could look to progress on to a business-related undergraduate degree, and that would just depend on the entry requirements for the institution that you're enrolling with. Or you could look to do a business-related professional qualification. An example of that would be the SIPS Level 4, which is part of this qualification. You might look to go and do the SIPS Level 5 qualification. So we have a look at the framework to understand where this qualification sits. This is a Level 4 apprenticeship, which you can see on the right-hand column. So that is equivalent to a higher national certificate or Year 1 at university. So what is it that's been assessed? What is this qualification made up of, and what sort of units are there? So the standard outlines knowledge, skills and behaviours, or KSBs, which you're expected to be able to show that you can perform in the workplace to achieve this qualification. And to get there, you have to train and learn. So this will also outline the training which is delivered as part of this qualification. There's a lot of things there, so you'd want to show that you can manage suppliers, you can manage costs, you can resolve problems, you can select suppliers, you can engage with documents appropriately and ensure that the correct processes and change controls are adhered to. And there's also some behaviours there as well, which would be expected, such as achieving timescales, making accurate judgments, and being responsive and innovative. And so those, when it comes to your portfolio of evidence, those are the KSBs which your evidence will prove that you can perform. So the apprenticeship should last 18 to 24 months in duration. Some learners will complete sooner than this and others may take longer. As long as there's a good reason to do so, we can look to extend that 24 months if required. Although typically most learners will take the 18 to 24 months to complete. The apprenticeship is split up into 3 phases or stages. The first stage is on programme. Sometimes it's called learning and assessment because during that stage you complete learning activities and assessment activities. This phase is typically the longest part of the apprenticeship. The next stage is gateway. Gateway is essentially a check to ensure that you are ready to move on to the endpoint assessment. And the endpoint assessment is the assessment which your grade is calculated from. So all of your assessments which go towards achieving this qualification and the grade which you receive takes place at the endpoint assessment. To support you through this apprenticeship, you'll be assigned a skills coach or an assessor who will be your main point of contact through the on-programme and gateway stages. However, at the endpoint assessment stage, you'll be allocated an independent endpoint assessor, so that will be a different person who's had no prior relationship with you, to complete those assessments and grade you. So let's work through these stages. So the on-programme stage is the first one. At the start of this stage, there is the planning process which is completed. So the planning process seeks to identify your prior skills and experience. They seek to identify training activities which is appropriate to your role and matches up with the KSBs, and also plan out your assessments. So that's a list of tasks that you're responsible for that you'll complete, which you can produce evidence on, and that will map into your KSBs to show you can perform those points. So at the start there's the planning process to identify all of that, and a custom one-off individual learning assessment plan is created, and that's what's followed throughout the rest of the on-programme stage. So if you're going to be competent at something, like we said, you have to learn how to do it. So it is a requirement that 20% of your time spent in the role on the apprenticeship is spent doing off-the-job training. And this is logged in your journal. So your journal is essentially a tracker or a log of all of the training which you have completed. Training is essential to be able to improve your performance, to get you used to your role, and to get you competent. Some of the training activities are sort of standard, so with this qualification you want to complete the SIPS Level 4 diploma, and so there's workshops or classes associated with that to get your knowledge level up to that stage where you can sit that exam for that certificate. However, there's also training activities which are specific to your role, and this will be planned out in your learning assessment plan, and that is also logged for your off-the-job tracker. Once you're at that competent level, you can then complete an assessment to prove that you're competent performing that task in the workplace, and that is what happens on this assessment part of the on-programme stage. With this, you'll produce a portfolio of evidence which covers all of the KSBs to show that you can perform a wide range of different skills in different situations and contexts and over a period of time. In addition to producing a portfolio, you'll also complete the SIPS Level 4 Diploma in Procurement and Supply. That is a knowledge and understanding based qualification where you sit either a written or a multiple choice test depending on the unit that you're completing to achieve that diploma. And the third assessment you complete on the on-programme stage is your functional skills at Level 2 in Maths and English. If you already have these qualifications, it's assessed using recognised prior learning. If not, your assessor or skills coach will guide you through the training and assessment to complete that element of the qualification. The next stage is gateway. So gateway is essentially an evaluation or discussion between the learner, the assessor, and also your mentor. So that'd be a representative from your employer. And typically it is the employer that has the leading role there in deciding that the learner's ready to move on to the endpoint assessment. It's essentially a check. So the prerequisites for this is to have spent a minimum of 12 months on programme and to have achieved the requirements of gateway. For this qualification, the requirements for gateway is that you have completed your portfolio of evidence across all of the knowledge, skills and behaviours. You have achieved your SIPS Level 4 diploma at this stage. You've achieved your functional skills in maths and English at Level 2. And you'd also complete the mock endpoint assessment to help prepare you to complete the endpoint assessment for real at EPA stage. It's also worth noting that at this stage you're allocated your independent endpoint assessor and you'll agree the scope for the project, which is one of the endpoint assessments. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. You'd only move past this point once everyone is happy that you are ready and comfortable and confident to complete the endpoint assessment. Then you'd move on to the final stage, which is the endpoint assessment. When it comes to achieving your apprenticeship, these are the assessments which really matter and contribute towards that grade. Everything else is supporting you to get to that level where you're ready to set this endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessment will typically take 6 months to complete, and you will be allocated this independent endpoint assessor to complete these assessments, so it's not someone who's had prior experience with you. So the first endpoint assessment is a project report, and the scope of this will be agreed with your endpoint assessor at the gateway stage. The project is completed during the endpoint assessment phase, so you wouldn't start working on this project until you've moved into your endpoint assessment phase. Typically, this project is on a procurement activity or exercise in the workplace. It could be about supplier selection, it could be on a improvement to a business process. It just depends what the title is and what the scope has been agreed with the independent endpoint assessors. But as a minimum, it should focus on 2 elements of the SIPS procurement cycle, and it should look to apply key KSBs that's in your standard. And for a full list of those KSBs, you can review the endpoint assessment strategy document. You would have 4 months to complete this project report. The word count is 5,000 words, but you have a discretionary plus or minus 10%. And there's a set structure for the report, which starts off with an executive summary. You've got your introduction, a literature review, research and findings, and it finishes off with recommendations and conclusions. You can also attach supporting evidence to the annex, and the annex doesn't count towards your word count. So it is a written report, so you complete a project and then you would write up a report based on that. The second endpoint assessment is the presentation and questioning. So with this, you would deliver a presentation to the panel on your work role and your responsibilities. The presentation typically lasts 10 minutes with a discretionary plus or minus 10%. Following the presentation, the independent endpoint assessor would then ask you 6 questions, and these questions will be based around the KSBs and they'll seek to illustrate certain elements within your presentation, so elements around your work role and responsibilities and how that could relate to the KSBs. In addition to those 6 questions, they may ask follow-up questions to clarify, and that questioning phase will last around 35 minutes. This should be done in a suitable location, so it should be done in a sort of quiet room, and it will include your independent endpoint assessor and a technical expert from your learner's workplace. That is often can be a mentor or a manager, but it is important that they are a technical expert, so that means that they must have at least 3 years procurement experience and also a professional qualification such as the SIPS diploma. This ensures that they are competent to help engage in the endpoint assessment, and their role is really to clarify that independent endpoint assessor. They will be an expert in procurement, but they might not necessarily know what your organisation's policies and procedures are or certain terminology, and that technical expert's there to translate that organisational specific detail so that the independent endpoint assessor can understand if that's right what the learner is stating in their questions. In terms of grading, those two assessments you'll be graded on by an independent endpoint assessor. The grades will be added together, and your final grade will be calculated. You can either fail, pass, or receive a distinction in this qualification, and that's just based on the grade that you received at that endpoint assessment. For a full breakdown of how these grades are calculated, I would review the endpoint assessment document. So just to summarise the learner journey from start to finish, sometimes it can help to look at it in this format. You would start off by creating an individual training and learning and assessment plan. You would then complete some workplace training. You'd complete your SIPS workshops, and you complete your functional skills training. And this is all going to be logged in your journal. Once you've completed your SIPS workshops, you can then sit the relevant exams for the SIPS Level 4 diploma. Once you've completed the workplace training and you're at a competent level to perform these skills in the workplace, you can then produce a portfolio of evidence that proves that. Once you've achieved your Level 4 SIPS exam and received a diploma, and once you've completed your portfolio of evidence, you can move on to Gateway. And at Gateway, the checks are done to ensure that you have everything. Your portfolio is reviewed to make sure it's the right standard, and the discussions had to ensure that you're ready and confident to complete the endpoint assessment. You would also complete your mock endpoint assessment to ensure you are prepared and you know what's involved in those assessments at EPA. And then you can then move on to endpoint assessment to complete your project and your presentation with question and answers. So thanks for listening, and hopefully that outlined the structure of this qualification.